Anyway, what we wanted to talk about today, it's our third day of the acronym GBOMS. So it's called onions. And we wanted to show you a raw salad with raw onions for the benefits they have. And they have tremendous health benefits as well as anti-cancer benefit. And Bill's going to talk more about those. But to show you this salad, I started with a bunch of kale picked from our farm where we volunteer. It's beautiful. And added some red cabbage, juiced a lemon, and an avocado, cut it up and massaged it into the leaves so they could start to soften. And they are starting to soften. It'll take probably another 20 minutes before they're really soft, but they're soft enough for us to add the other ingredients. So in this salad, we did half a red onion chopped up, and it has such wonderful nutrients. And then any kind of dried fruit that you like, or even fresh fruit. Like you could use fresh blueberries in here, grapes, I'll put a few grapes in. These are dried tart cherries, cranberries, blueberries, and golden berries. And I'm going to dump those in, and that'll give it a sweet flavor to the salad. And then we want to add an apple. So I'll cut some of this and just chunk it. While I'm doing that part, maybe you could talk about the onion, but before that, we're going to add the apple, and then I'll add a few grapes. And I thought about, how can I make this a complete meal so we don't have to fix something else? So I drained a can of garbanzo beans, and we're going to add these chickpeas at the very end. So then we have one dish meal, which I love so much because it saves so much time. So while I cut the apple, if you'd share about onions.
Yeah, it's interesting. Onions are so prevalent in almost every traditional diet, from the Middle Eastern diets and the Mediterranean diets and the Spanish diets. Onions are just across the board a very common staple in almost every traditional diet. And so when we're talking about onions, we're talking about leeks and garlic, chives, shallots, scallion. Those are all in the onion family. So when Dr. Joel Fuhrman talks about having onion every day, it's any of those: leeks, garlics, chives, shallots, scallions. And the thing about them, when you look at the biochemistry, I guess you might say, what it is that they have these organosulfur compounds. Now, that's a big name just for a healthy nutrient. And what's interesting about these is that it's very similar to the compounds that are found in cruciferous vegetables. The cruciferous vegetables being in the cabbage family, so that's the kale and the broccoli and the cauliflower. And we've been talking about that forever, about how important it is. This is your dark leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables, and they seem to be they're at the top of the chart in terms of high nutrient density.
For sure.
So the onions have these same organosulfur compounds that make dark leafy greens and the cruciferous vegetables so important in a high nutrient dense diet. And what we've talked about before about these compounds in cruciferous vegetables is that these compounds are released when the onions are chopped or crushed or chewed. So there's a real value in one, this relates to both the cruciferous and the onions, chopping them for a while before we eat them, chewing them really well, or like with dark leafy greens, putting them in a smoothie where they get wort up. It actually increases the amount of these organosulfur compounds that are so valuable. And basically what's important about them is that these compounds prevent the development of cancers. Basically, they actually detoxify the carcinogens. So if we've eaten something or something's been created in our body, in our gut, that is carcinogenic, it actually detoxifies them. And so it stops the cancer cell growth, and it blocks what's called angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the proliferation of blood vessels. So why scientists like to see that is because for cancer cells and tumors to grow, they have to grow a lot of blood vessels to feed that growing tumor. And so anything that stops this angiogenesis or stops the proliferation of the blood vessels helps to halt cancer development. So yeah, so along with these organosulfur compounds, they're really high onions. Everything in the onion family is really high in antioxidants. And the red onion has more antioxidants than any of the other onions, any of the other foods in the onion family. So that's a good reason to keep red onions around too. But you want a right variety. Every food has a different nutrient profile. So it's a good idea to always eat the whole variety within the onion family, to whatever degree is easy, because they're not always available at the store. But whenever like the leeks are available, you might look at making a leek soup or something when they're available.
Oh, leeks are so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of what it is. These antioxidants, they slow tumor development and also have anti-inflammatory effects, which, I mean, basically what they're seeing too is that it seems like cancer cannot grow in a, well, let me put it the other way. Cancer grows in an inflammatory condition. If our bodies aren't inflamed, the cancers don't grow. So
when we eat whole food, plant-based, our bodies are not inflamed. We aren't eating any inflammatory foods.
yeah.
As long as, especially, we cut out the oil in a bottle. Most of those oils are inflammatory.
Yeah, so that was my experience when I met Connie. I know I've told you all this so many times before, but all that arthritic pain that was threatening to take me off the volleyball court, it just went away in a matter of weeks. Once I stopped eating the inflammatory foods, mostly dairy because I was lacto-vegetarian, but when I took that dairy out and added in the dark leafy greens, I mean, I was eating predominantly anti-inflammatory foods. I was eating a lot of processed foods, and all that's inflammatory. So yeah, that made a huge difference in my life. I'm so glad to have found it.
So there's the salad one way without the beans. And then we can just dump the beans on top or use them as a garnish as we dish the salad. We've got our one dish meal. Now, caution. If you have poor digestion, you may not be able to eat raw, and you may not want to combine fruit with beans. So you can use this salad as it is, if raw is okay, and that'll be easier on the digestion. But be careful with adding the beans to this as well. That can be a little more difficult. when you mix fruit with beans. So onions, we want to use this acronym GBOMS to really eat the foods that will bring the highest level of nutrient into the body, as well as give us the highest level of health.